This is Brent Allen Winters, commonlawyer.com, www.commonlawyer.com. Coming to you, as we say, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long. 226. Let's look at 226. This is, again, our common law tradition, and our Constitution of the United States is a brief of common law government, a slice of our common law. Remember, not what, but how. In this case, how government is supposed to function. How far can it go? How far can it go? 226, the question. Stansbury's common Catechism on the Constitution. May the President appoint any officers without consent of the Senate? We'd said yes, some inferior officers. Sure, he can. But Supreme Court of the United States, no, that has to be a nomination and appointment of the president and a confirmation at the advice and consent of the old gray-bearded men, the senile men in the Senate. Senile. And now we've given a negative definition of that word, but senile and Senate are the same Greek root, and they just mean old. Oh, he's senile. See, we've made that a negative thing, but to a Latin speaker, nobody speaks Latin as a native tongue anymore, but that would mean just an old guy. And it applies to inferior officers, that is, such have other officers over them. I have a commission. I don't know where it is. Signed by the President of the United States. I have it in a frame. I used to have it hanging on the wall. I know I've got it someplace. I never lose nothing. I don't throw anything away. That's the problem. Then I keep so many things that they're piled up and I don't know where they are. But I got a commission signed by the President of the United States. A commission to the rank of first lieutenant. The President of the United States did not have to ask the Senate of the United States whether or not it was okay to appoint me. No, he's commander in chief. He can do that. He can appoint it, and he does. He appoints all of the officers in our armed forces, and every officer in our armed forces, there are thousands of them, have a commission signed by the President of the United States. That's a true story. And that's what he's talking about here. The President, what officers are appointed by the President? Well, the ambassadors, ministers, Supreme Court justices, counsels. We mentioned that yesterday. A counsel is a fellow that is appointed to a foreign port to make sure that the laws and the treaties are kept. That country where he is has a treaty with the United States. Right heard on that. I just saw yesterday. I only know what to read on the internet. I just saw yesterday that the Ruskies, not too long ago, invaded our space in Alaska. Their ships, they sailed within the 12-mile limit. That's the understood 12-mile, understood jurisdictional limit along all of our coastline, and no foreign ships are to enter that 12-mile limit without our permission, any permission of our general government. Under the Admiralty Clause. The Admiralty Clause gives exclusive jurisdiction to the general government in Washington, D.C. over all things pertaining to maritime law. That means that when a ship of a foreign nation flagged, whether a warship or a merchant ship, enters that 12-mile limit without permission, it's an act of war. You see? That's martial law. Admiralty law is a martial kind of law. And once that happens, then you'd be justified blowing it out of the water. Now, we don't do that in most cases, but what we did in this case with the Ruskies, from what I read, the commander, we encircled them, surrounded them with our ships, an aircraft carrier, which one was it? I forget, Gerald Ford or something, and said, wouldn't you kindly move your operations outside of our 12-mile limit? Send them a message. And they sent back a message a little later and said, well, we're conducting a drill. Well, you can do that outside the 12-mile limit. Would you please just move? And then we're getting aggressive. We're showing signs of aggression. Why do we do that? Well, under the law of the sea, that's the way the law of the sea works. Without force or threat of force, there is no law of the sea. You fire this has been true for a few hundred years. You fire a shot over their bow. You fire on small boats, you fire in front of their bow. That's part of international law. If ships try to push you out of the way, you don't move. That's why ships have for years, ever since 48, the Communist Revolution, American ships, I can give you personal testimony, go into the straits between Taiwan and the mainland, and these ships bump each other hard enough to put large dents in each other. Why? There must be a show of aggression under international law to maintain our jurisdiction on the high seas. That's the law. There must be a show of aggression. And what they call ramming and bumping is part of that. That's just par for the course. Then you do it, then you take your ship back in when you can, go into the dry dock and get the damage fixed. We had an Indian tribe at home. Down in Oklahoma, the Indian tribes are taking over Oklahoma again. They want all that oil money back and a whole lot of other stuff. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying they're on the move down there. And one of the tribes that is down there, namely the Kickapoo Nation, there's a Kickapoo Reservation in Kansas. There's a Kickapoo lands in Oklahoma. And then some of the Kickapoo got ticked off at the United States and just packed up their stuff and walked over into Mexico, and they've been there for several decades living in their wiki-ups. Wiki-up, that's what that's so they take branches or sapling poles and bend them over like this, and they put bark and anything they can find over them. That's called a wiki-up. It's kind of like think of the name of the thing. But anyway, that's what they lived in. And back home, that tribe, they got to kicking up their heels, and they said, they sued the county board members in the county where I lived personally and said they wanted their houses back because their houses set on their land. Oh, people laughing about it, they were having a Indian uprising, and they were in federal court in East St. Louis. And then they filed a suit against the local agricultural university, said they want that land back too. Well, then they started taking it serious. People started thinking, wait a minute, we're going to have to answer this complaint in federal court. Well, so theories started floating around. People were talking in the coffee shops. What are we going to do if they come to my house? Want my farmland? Of course, people were buying firearms and saying, nobody's coming taking my land, and a bunch of Indians come around here, Kickapoo or not. I never was down on a Kickapoo myself. Some of them still around. You can see their gravestones around, too. I grew up at a place called Kickapoo. We lived close to Kickapoo, but went to church at White Oak. Kickapoo had a church and a school down the road about a quarter mile. My grandma went to school at Kickapoo School. Kickapoo were around there, but the theory that got to floating around was, now wait a minute, these Kickapoos, they don't have a leg to stand on, saying that we got to give anything back. Why? And this is a common law principle. Because when we came here, when the white man came here, the Kickapoo did not resist. They didn't go on the warpath at all. The Shawnee, they were around here. They went on the warpath. The Blackfeet, no, not Blackfeet. That's out in Montana, Dan, if you're still listening. I'll get my tribes mixed up. Isn't it the Blackfeet? Yeah, the Blackfeet are in Montana. I've been through that reservation. They say when you drive through that reservation, that little town, if you're a white boy, you don't stop. And I drove through. I didn't stop. I don't know. That's just what they told me. Don't stop. Well,
especially night.
Oh, well, okay. Montana Dan's backing me up on that, especially at night. Thank you, Montana. And it's a little town. By the way, the name of that town is Blackfeet, isn't it? Or something like that?
Yeah, there's several towns up there. Browning. Yeah, it's a big reservation up there.
Yeah. Now, Montana, Dan, haven't you? I don't know. Fill me in. I don't remember. You told me you have kept some Blackfeet children before. Is that true?
They were Cheyenne and Crow.
Oh, Crow. Yeah. Cheyenne. Yeah.
I guess some of them were Nez Perce. No. Uh,
Uh,
Assiniboine.
oh, what was it? What was the last one?
Assiniboine. That's in eastern Montana.
Okay. Well, I bring this up for this reason. As we're talking about this, I don't want people to think that you and I are against the Indian tribes. Just the opposite. From what I can tell about you, you want to help as much as you can, and you have in a sacrificial way. But the Black Hawk, that was back in my neck of the woods, and there was a war. The Black Hawk went on the warpath, and the Black Hawk War was no small matter. As a matter of fact, Abe Lincoln led a company of men in the Black Hawk War, and they had joined up with the Shawnee, but then they broke off. Black Hawk, Pontiac was back in that part of the world, a fellow named Pontiac, and his people died on a place called Starved Rock. They were reduced to very few, and they climbed up on this rock that was overlooking the Illinois River, and white boys surrounded them, and they said, "We ain't moving. Come and get us. We're willing to die." And they stayed up there until they all died. They starved, and the rock is now called Starved Rock. But they fought, and so the theory was they have standing to bring suit. But if you didn't fight, the Kickapoo were a very peaceful people. They liked to raise watermelons and squash, and by the way, they were experts at string art. Where you take a string, put it on your hand, and do all this stuff. And that's what they were known for. But if you don't assert your rights to land, my friends, listen to me. In our common law tradition, if you don't assert your rights to land, you lose them. And the courts will even tell you that at some point. You assert your rights to land. Belligerence is the way we keep land in our common law tradition, as in the mining tradition. People come try to high grade our claims. Mining tradition in the gold fields, they try to high grade our claims, and we knew that the law said it's up to us to keep our claims. And so if we didn't go out there and demand people get off and be belligerent, that's a nice word, belligerent, about it, we had no standing in court to, and also the belligerents then must go into the courts. You must be willing to file suit. And if you're not willing to build a fence, order people off, get loud with them a little bit, you'll lose your land. Well, that's what they were saying about the Blackfeet compared to the Kickapoo, two different cultures. One was peaceful. Oh, I shouldn't say that entirely. The Kickapoo did join the Shawnee and got pretty brutal at some points. And then I found out, but at that time they weren't over where we were. But they also became brutal when they got to Oklahoma. They engaged in some serious warfare. The tribes in Oklahoma, a lot of them joined the Confederacy. And a lot of the tribes in America, when we gained our independence from Britain, a lot of the tribes joined the Americans, the Continental Army. Well, they were always there. I remember reading about Appomattox Courthouse, and Robert E. Lee finally came into Appomattox to meet his old friend from the war in Mexico and from many other things that had happened in their careers. His old friend, General Ulysses S. Grant, both of them former slaveholders, by the way. The rest of the story. And they talked a little bit about the past, not much. And then they signed the papers, and General Grant was very conciliatory. He said, your boys will need their horses for spring plowing, so I'm going to put it in there that you fellows can keep your horses. And I think there were some other things they could keep, but I think some of them could keep their firearms. They did have the rank and file men stack their rifles and turn them over to the Union Army, but then others could keep some of their handguns. Some of them had horse pistols. They're revolvers at that time, cap and ball, but they were revolvers. 6 shots. 6 shooters, they called them. But then, after they'd signed the papers, introductions were made to some of the men that were standing around. They shook hands on both sides, shook hands with Grant, and there was an officer there on the staff of U.S. Grant, and he introduced himself and told his name, and you can look him up. I don't remember his name. And he was one of the American tribesmen. I don't remember. I think he might have been from Oklahoma on the Union side. I don't remember. He was on the staff of U.S. Grant. And General Lee found out he was not a white man, as we say, but a red man. And he said, and General Lee said, well, at least there's one true American here at the surrender meeting to witness what goes on, or something to that effect. Well, that says something about Robert E. Lee and something about U.S. Grant, too, quite a bit. Well, we get through 226, 227. May Congress give the appointment of such officers to any other than the president? The answer, yes. It may give it to the courts of law or to heads of departments on the cabinet, you see. Courts of law. If a president nominates a person for Supreme Court justice position, United States Supreme Court, and the Senate of the United States gives advice and consent of the president on that, and does consent, and that man does become a Supreme Court justice, then that man, as Supreme Court justice, has authority to hire and appoint clerks to help him. He doesn't have to ask the president, you see. And that's the point he's making here. As I'd said, all the military officers have appointments as military officers from the President of the United States without the advice and consent. Of course, the President is Commander-in-Chief. Why would he? That's part of his branch of government. Yes, but there are certain offices that our Constitution of the United States says, no, you got to get permission. And I said yesterday, even King Alfred, when he was 6 years old in the year 855 AD, the elders, the gray-bearded, the wizened old men, required that they give their advice and consent to the King of England before he sold 10 wagon loads of firewood and a hide of land. A common law king in the old Anglo-Saxon world was a limited position. Now, when war broke out, at the advice and consent of the gray-bearded men, the eldership, that was their decision, who has authority to declare war in America? The president? Answer, no. The Congress of the United States, that's an exclusive jurisdiction of the men, the eldership, so to speak. That's our common law tradition, not the president. But once they declare that war, the president of the United States receives a lot of power. And that's the way it was with the ancient Anglo-Saxon kings. Once the eldership, the Wittengemot, declared war, they handed over to him a lot of power and said, we're going to obey you until this is over. That's what would happen. And that's what happens here in cases of war. That's our common law tradition. But those plenary powers don't come just all the time. What do you mean by heads of departments? Question 228. This name is given to certain officers who have the chief care under the president of the four great branches of government. Now listen to him here. I said a while ago there are three branches of government. The executive, that's the president. In England, they call it king. The executive, the legislative, here called in our national government called the Congress of the United States. In our states, we call it the state legislature. Executive, legislative, and judicial. Those are the three branches of government. Now, I object a little bit to his wording here. He says the great branches of government. He calls the executive departments, who are called the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Treasury, the Secretary of War, and the Secretary of the Navy. Now, what he's done here is, you pick up on this, I'm sure you have, the three great branches of government, I'd rather say it this way, are legislative, executive, and judicial, co-equal powers. But within the legislative branch, there are four fundamental, indispensable departments. The department called State Department, and the head of the State Department is the Secretary of State. The Treasury Department, and the head of the Treasury Department is the Secretary of the Treasury. The War Department, and the head of the War Department is called the Secretary of War. And the Department of the Navy, which of course includes the Marine Corps. The Department of the Navy, and the head of that department is the Secretary of the Navy. Just four. All these other things that the president has in his cabinet are unlawful, unconstitutional. They're not part of the understanding of our country as it started. Do we need, they call them now czars. Czars! What's czar? Czar is a Russian word. A Russian word. A Russian word for what? It's their pronunciation of the word Caesar. Does that put a little more color to it? Tsar is the Russian pronunciation of the word Caesar, and the Russian tongue is really very much like the Greek tongue. Caesar is a Greek word. You remember Julius Caesar? He was emperor of the Roman Empire. It's a word of power, of tyranny, of despotism. So we recognize these are powerful folk that are not constitutional, that the president is appointing to positions of power, like the Secretary of Education, unconstitutional 190%. Education has to do with police powers. Under our Constitution in our country, the police powers belong only to the states within their territorial boundaries. And the only place the police powers of the general government of Washington, D.C. are exercised are in what we call federal enclaves. Enclaves. That means a military base, a federal dockyard, a federal ammunition dump, a army base, a navy base, a federal courthouse. But other than that, states have plenary power, and one of the three parts of the plenary police powers is education. Police powers have to do with health, education, and welfare of the people within the state. What does that mean? Let me give you a little more what we understand about that. To flesh it out, that means that the police powers, those three things, health, education, and welfare, give your state the power to dictate the future behaviors of men concerning those three things, to command men and women to do certain things or to forbear from doing certain things. That's what legislation is. It's a command from government. And the general government in Washington, D.C., under a constitutional scheme that overarches a lot of things here. Under that, the police powers belong to the states within the states, health, education, and welfare. The power to dictate the future behaviors of men. That's power, friends. It belongs to the states, not to Congress, except in their very, very limited jurisdiction. Well, Secretary of State, this is worth remembering. Secretary of State, the State Department, the Treasury Department, the War Department, and the Navy Department. The War Department covers the Army. The Navy Department covers the Marine Corps and the U.S. Navy. That's all they had when the country started. And then when we started an Air Force, the Air Force was kept under the Navy and the Army. They were part of the Navy or the Army, and they still are. The Navy has lots of airplanes, fighter jets. They're the strike force that's out there, can be anywhere it needs to be in a moment's notice. Their flyers and their fighters are top guns. They're good. But then we had the naval or the Army Air Corps during World War II. We didn't have an Air Force. That was all under the Army. That was all under what we called the Department of War. And it should have never been taken out, by the way. Now they got an Air Force and a Space Force. No. Let's not make things that complicated. There's no reason for it. No reason for it. 4 departments. Secretary of War and Secretary of the Navy. Brent Winters, go to the website, commonlawyer.com, coming at you from the remote hinterlands of the Wabash River Valley, where the hogs, the frogs, and the dogs keep up a racket all night long.